some people have very, very damaged guts. And this is something that Salsbury actually found out. This is why he made the Salsbury steak. The Salsbury steak was a way of grinding down beef in a particular fashion that it filtered out the gristle of the beef. So it only got just the meat and just the fat, and all the gristle stuff was filtered out of it. And this was because, he was treating people that had extremely poor guts. And, this is 100 years before we had any feasible treatment for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, people having, copious bloody diarrhea and just in so much pain. And so this was something, when you took the gristle out, you would absorb basically 100% of it.
Welcome to the Red Pill Sangha podcast. Diet, lifestyle, spirituality, tales of healing. The Sangha, the collective, is waking up. Links below to my autoimmunity consults, online course, books, support groups, and live events. Check them out. Okay, well, welcome back. And today I have the honor of Dr. Anthony Chaffee. And it's great to get him on. I came to see, first learn about Anthony when he became a terrible nuisance on my 100% carnivore and beyond group, posting all sorts of terrible misinformation, flying in the face of established dietary science, and posting pics of his abs and stuff. I mean, the man's obviously completely malnourished, but I have it on good authority, though, that he is training hard with broccoli, trying to get full reps like his hero, Dr. Michael Greger. So hopefully he will attain a proper physique soon. But no, seriously, I mean, it gives me a lump in my throat when docs wake up. And because of what I've done, I've just been really, really lucky to have got to know a bunch of them, Sean and Zafir Clements and all the other docs who are just waking up and speaking out about this. I think it's so important at the moment to get this message out because there's a war on meat. And, these elites are really coming down hard on us. I would like this to stay up on YouTube, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But it's just great to have you on, Anthony. Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Cool. So you did a great interview the other day with our mutual friend, Bart, and I'm going to link that below because I think people should have a look at that too. And I don't want to cover too much of the same ground, but let us know what happened with the young Anthony. Well, how did you wake up to this stuff? What drew you to being a doctor? I have a suspicion that you're one of those weird doctors who actually care about patients and didn't go into it for the money. And what happened? I mean, in your youth, were you aware of this? Did it happen through your medical practice? Do you have trouble with your colleagues? What went on?
Well, I think I'm one of the few people that actually wanted to be a doctor ever since I was a kid. I remember actually thinking when I was a kid that'd be really interesting. And I always wanted to know just exactly how the body worked down to like the molecular level. I remember thinking that specifically when I was a young child. I think a lot of that had to do with influences from family members. They had some, very interesting stories of family members. My great grandfather was the youngest ever graduate from Columbia Medical School. He finished when he was 20. He finished a 6-year program in 4 years. Finished when he was 20, and it was like the original Doogie Howser of the 1800s because he actually wasn't legal to go start his residency in New York, so he had to go home and hang out for a year, and then go back and start his residency. So very interesting guy, had a lot of, he was in a very interesting time in medical history because this was exactly when anesthesia was developed and sterile practice. So he was the second class at Columbia taught sterile practice. And so this is the very beginning of modern day surgery. And he was on the forefront of that. And he was actually there looking at things, trying to figure out what we could do. Okay, they're trying to figure out surgery, trying to figure out making tools. He actually had a foundry. He could forge metal. So he would actually design and make his own surgical tools and equipment. I still have some of those. And so this is a really cool guy. He ended up going to California. He was the 13th medical license California ever gave out. He ended up in the Redlands in Southern California because he just really loved the desert Southwest. And very interesting guy, very interesting story. And then my father's uncle was one of these original African missionaries where there weren't really missions set up. Now there's tons of programs, tons of charities to send people all over the world to impoverished areas and so forth. There wasn't really programs like that 100 years ago or so. I don't know exactly. I think he was sort of in the 30s and 40s is when he was first going over there, and maybe in the 40s. And so he just sort of went out and just started opening up clinics in different areas and just started just going around, hopping around a couple 100 miles every day and just go from clinic to clinic to clinic and raised his children, in that setting. My father said he met his cousins when he was young. He said they were like feral animals. They had no table manners. They're just running all over the place wild. But what a cool way to grow up. And so, you just hear these stories and I was like, I want to do that. I want to do something like that. So I was always interested in medicine from a very early age. And I was also very interested in athletics and sports. And so I got very heavily involved in that, in rugby and training in MMA since I was 14. I just got lucky, one of the top gyms and trainers in the world, AMC Kickboxing in Kirkland, with trainer Matt Hume, was a few miles from my house. So I was there just every hour of every day was open for years and absolutely loved it. And so because I always wanted to do medicine, I was always interested in science, and I was always very interested in sports. I had a natural interest in nutrition and what that meant scientifically, but also what that could do for me as an individual. And so I studied this. I studied all the traditional aspects of nutrition and so forth. So I had, of just going by the book because I was too young to question these things. I didn't know enough to question them. And I was always very meat centric. I was always loved meat ever since I was a little kid. I remember my sister wanted to go vegetarian. And I remember hearing that word and it just sounded way too much like vegetables. And it just, I was very nervous about it. And I asked my mom, like, what does that mean? She said, well, vegetarian is someone who only wants to eat vegetables. And I was like, only wants to eat vegetables? I was like, well, then I'm a meatitarian because I only want to eat meat. And I did as much as I could. When I was in University of Washington in Seattle, I was taking a class in cancer biology. And we were learning straight away, the way that plants defend themselves predominantly is by using toxic components and elements and chemicals to deter predation, make an animal sick or even kill them if they try to eat them. And we know this from basic biology. It was actually something I learned in 7th or 8th grade biology was plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them so they can survive and thrive, or else they go extinct. Most things that have existed have gone extinct at this point. Animals do the same thing. They are evolving and adapting to break down specific poisons in specific plants safely so they can eat that plant or that family of plants and survive and thrive. And then most other things can't eat them. This is why of the 340,000 plants in the world, koalas eat one, pandas eat one, cows, horses, grazing animals eat grass, and that's pretty much it. And, the leaves that a gorilla eats are different from the leaves that a giraffe eats. Those are different, again, from the leaves that a deer eats, and so on. And while koalas only eat eucalyptus, almost nothing else eats eucalyptus. And a koala really can't eat anything else either. That will make them sick. And we know this inherently. We go get lost in the woods and we just run out of food. We try to eat any random plant. Everyone knows you can't do that because they'll make you very sick. And I was asked, well, why can't you do that? We're like, oh, well, because they're poisonous. It's like, exactly. And this is something, this is a common theme in the plant kingdom and the fungus kingdom.
I always think there must have been some oh, sorry. Right. Here I am. Sorry. I always think there must have been some poor dude in the tribe that they sort of sent out to see which plant was
tried the plants. Yeah.
I mean, I heard you talking about this to Bart, and I've heard it. Obviously, I'm very aware of plant toxins, but honestly, just cover a little bit of that ground again. Really drill it into people. It was amazing when you said that there's 160 human carcinogens in Brussels sprouts alone. Yeah, I mean, tell people about this stuff. It's amazing.
Yeah. So that was 20 plus years ago that I took that class in cancer biology. And so, we were looking, relearning that this is how plants defend themselves is by using, poisons. We were looking at it from a cancer perspective. So we were looking at carcinogens. And 20 plus years ago, we had already discovered and learned in this class that Brussels sprouts had 136, individual known human carcinogens, and mushrooms had over 100. Spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, you name it, anything that you can ever buy at a store. We were given lists with a number of known human carcinogens that we already had discovered in these plants, and I didn't see a single one under 60. So we've known since the 1980s that they're quite abundant. Work from Professor Bruce Ames out of UC Berkeley, who, when they started challenging the idea of using pesticides, they said, well, pesticides, these are toxic, these are poison, we shouldn't use them. And he kind of pointed out that we've been using these same pesticides actually in greater volume for 80 years and never had a problem. But now why are they causing a problem now? So he did the science, he did the research, because he's, a science-minded man. And he found that actually there were 10,000 times more naturally occurring poisons in plants than the pesticides we spray on them by weight. And that the naturally occurring poisons were far more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides we were spraying on them. So the idea that if you grow it in your own garden or you buy organic, then that's good. No, in fact, it's the plant itself that causes harm. This is why we still have pesticides. This is why they're still legal to use, because in respect to the plant itself, like spinach or Brussels sprouts, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not bad for you.
Oh,
and
man,
so
I've been there. I've had kidney stones from juicing spinach at the end of the ridiculous vegan phase. I sent you the pics of my transition. And when I was really, really skinny and lost all my muscle, because I used to have a gym in the late 90s, and then I lost all my muscle, and on the veganism thing, ended up emaciated, and it didn't help my joints. And I ended up with a really big kidney stone stuck in the ureter for a long time, and had to get it lasered out. I'm just not going back there. Those oxalates, absolutely hideous.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. We were told by most doctors that a high protein diet is bad for your kidneys. So eat a bunch of plants that have oxalates and other sorts of things you can't process whatsoever, and you have to pass them out. Either through your urine or some other means. And so we tell people to go on a plant-based, even vegan diet in order to protect their kidneys, and their kidneys just get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And this is what you see. And certainly not everyone, every nephrologist is doing this, but certainly a lot of them are. I see so many people, and so many people reach out to me and ask me about that exact questions, like, is this going to be bad for my kidneys and so forth? And, I send them papers and research and so forth, because it was theorized that higher protein would be harder on your kidneys because you have to cleave nitrogen from, the amino group, and this gets passed out. It gets turned into ammonia, and then this gets further turned into urea, and we pass out urea. And so people think that higher urea means poor kidney function. That's not actually the case. Urea is actually one of your body's strongest antioxidants. And so this is actually doing a lot of work in your body, a lot of good work in your body to have that up a little bit. And it's not a sign.
Sorry to interrupt. I've heard this is quite a common thing, that people get very high uric acid levels when they go carnivore. And often they get attacks of gout and whatever. And I've seen some ideas that uric acid is probably pretty similar to cholesterol, in that it's the paramedic at the car crash in there to sort of help stuff out. Is that the way it goes? And it's more of a sort of oxalate problem?
It's it's been a while since I've looked into that, so I don't remember the exact details. But the take home is that we've had studies and research out since the 1800s of reversing gout by putting people on a pure red meat and water diet. So this was written about by Dr. J.H. Salsbury, for whom the Salsbury steak was named. He was writing about this, and he was reversing rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, gout, ulcerative colitis, and many other things, chronic Lyme disease, and so forth. By putting people on a pure red meat and water diet, he said that beef was the best, lamb was a distant second. And so this is something that we've seen and known for a very long time. People are doing this now. They've been, don't eat red meat. Well, if you're eating red meat in the context of all this other crap that you're eating, sure, that might be a problem. But it's not the meat that's the problem. It's all the other things that are a problem. And so if you cut those things out, the gout goes away. And I apologize, I haven't actually brushed up on the exact mechanism of that. in a while, so I can't describe it perfectly. But the take home is that if you get rid of all the plants, alcohol, sugar, and so forth, that goes away when you go on a meat diet. So obviously, this isn't just the fact that you have higher nitrogen in your system and so forth, and you're making more urea and uric acid and so forth. So it's not as simple as that. And just like you alluded to with cholesterol, it's not as simple as high cholesterol equals heart disease. We know that very clearly because there are studies with hundreds of thousands of patients in America who have had myocardial infarction, a heart attack, and they found that one half of these people have low LDL cholesterol. And in fact, in 2 years follow-up, the people that still had low cholesterol and maintained a low cholesterol had 2 times the mortality rate of people with high cholesterol. So, and there's a ton of other studies too. I was just in a debate on cholesterol and, went against 3 traditional cardiologists and argued all these points. But, there isn't even a correlation with cholesterol. All the major studies that have come out recently looking at, literature reviews and meta-analyses and so forth of all the available literature have found that there isn't even a correlation. And we know that there wasn't a correlation originally because the correlative studies like the 7 Nations study and other studies that came out in the 60s and 70s were actually bought and paid for by the sugar companies. And we actually know that. We have hard evidence of that now. The Journal of the American Medical Association published that in 2015. And so we have hard evidence of it. We have documentation of this. The Framingham study was misrepresented. It actually found that if you reduce cholesterol, cardiac death goes up. And the American Heart Association 2 years later said that it was the opposite, said that if you lower cholesterol, your heart disease rate went down. That was complete fraud. They completely misrepresented this study.
Do you think they knew this? Or were they just
yeah,
idiots?
No. Well, the people at the top absolutely knew this. There's very clear documentation that was reported in that JAMA article in 2015 showing that the sugar companies paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA in the late 60s, I think 1967. And then he helped author and publish the USDA declaration that cholesterol caused heart disease and recommended people stop eating cholesterol, stop eating saturated fat. So this guy was in the pocket. We actually know how much he got paid. He got paid $6,500 at the time. And that's equivalent of about $50,000 US now. That was the price of his soul and the health of the world. And you'd think that a tenured professor at Harvard wouldn't be that hard up, but apparently he was.
I suspect there is a hell of a lot of that going on in the medical system at the moment, and as well, with all the other lunacy that's going on, covering stuff.
It certainly is, and it's just a matter of trying to uncover this stuff. It's a little late to hold this guy accountable because he's passed away, but we can at least try and undo the damage that he did, and he did a lot of damage. That declaration caused people to go down the completely opposite route of what they should. And because of it, first of all, the heart disease rates have tripled since that declaration came through. And other diseases have increased. Obesity rates tripled, stroke rates tripled, cancer rates have tripled, type 2 diabetes increased by 5.8-fold, autoimmune diseases, autism, Parkinson's, dementia, and so forth. These have increased exponentially. These things almost didn't exist before that. Now they're the only things we treat. And people say, well, when you get old enough, if you get old enough, everyone will get Alzheimer's. Well, they didn't used to. That's a very new phenomenon. And so, and we're looking at this, we're calling, yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying that, now we're even referring to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes because there are metabolic functions going on that even though you have these very specific plaques that we see on autopsy in a patient with Alzheimer's, even if you have those plaques, you don't display the disease unless you have certain metabolic situations involved. So if you have hyperinsulinemia, so high insulin and high blood sugar and peripheral insulin resistance. So this is type 2 diabetes in a nutshell, it's peripheral insulin resistance. The insulin stops working as well on your peripheral tissue because you've just been using so much of it for so long. It's like any, drug reaction relationship. You do a bunch of cocaine, you get really high, but now you keep doing it. You need more and more and more and more and more to get the same high, or maybe even less high. And so that's the same thing with your tissues with insulin. So it gets resistant to that, and your brain does too.
If anybody wants to look into this, I think there's some great stuff by, I think it's Amy Berger, isn't it? And she's done a lot of stuff on this being, Alzheimer's being type 3 and keto diets really turning around the cognitive functions in people when they're starting to show this. And, it amazes me when you look at these tribes and they're absolutely completely there into their old age. And they're sort of, those great things where it wasn't Paul Saladino, it was Brian Sanders, wasn't it? And he went out and to these tribes and recently, and he did some podcasts, and there's like 120-year-olds pogoing with the tribes, and they're all there. People say, oh, these people die young. It's all the infant mortality
nonsense,
all that nonsense. And also, there are some theories, aren't there, that sometimes they dug these bones up and they said, oh, these bones are like 30, 40 years old. The person was when they died. Probably they weren't, because they were in such good nick. They might have been way older. So. All of this horrible misconceptions coming from that whole vegan thing and the Ansel Keys thing. And I mean, Ansel Keys, what did he do when he'd done all the studies? He went off and lived in Italy, probably ate a load of fatty fish and whatever, and lived to 100 years old. So he ignored his own advice and benefited from it. Incredible corruption.
Yeah, well, I'm sure because he flat out knew what was going on, so he wasn't going to do it. But unfortunately, he didn't share that with the rest of the world. When you look at these, fossil records and so forth, you talk to people about this, that you can't actually tell the age of a skeleton or a jaw or teeth past maturity. You have certain points where you can say, okay, well, this is maturing to this point, to this point, to this point. Usually we see 18 to 22 and 22 to 26. And, the lambdoid suture in the back of your head is the last suture in your skull. The fuse usually about 35. So that guy still had it. So he was probably just under that. Or that one's fused. So he's over that. But that's all you can tell. You can't really tell more than that. If you're just going off arthritis and so forth, all you can tell is that that person was diseased and they had a problem. That you can't necessarily say that they were old or anything like that. And so past maturity, you can't really tell. You just know that this person made it to physical maturity, and that's it. You have no idea how much older they got. And so, you're right. With the infant mortality, I think probably you and I and other people in this category who've basically had people challenge different sorts of things. So we've gone and looked these things up. I'm probably the only ones who know this, but I have on my phone just a list of different resources and links and things like that. One of them are the census data from the United States going back to 1850, looking at by 10-year increments the average life expectancy of Americans at that time. And so you look back at 1850, and the average age from birth was 36. And so this is where everyone gets that. They say, oh, well, people are only living into their 30s. They're like, no, they weren't just dying in their 30s. This is an average. And on average, 3 out of 5 children died in infancy. So you need to actually get pretty old to pull that average up to even 36. And every 10-year increment, the average age increased dramatically. So if you made it, it was 36 from birth, but if you got to 10, it was 56. And if you got to 20, it was 66. And so you get into adulthood and you get past these early causes of death. You actually live quite a lot older. And so, they go up to 80. And so in 1850, if you made it to 80, on average, you'd make it to 86. Well, in 2017, which is the last time this was updated that I saw, in 2017, if you made it to 80, you made it to 88. So, is that really that much of a difference? We have all sorts of different historical figures that lived to great ages, and this was a normal thing. It wasn't like, my God, that was crazy. That was just Methuselah making it to 60. No, these people regularly lived to great ages if they made it that far in the first place. If you didn't die from some exterior force.
Yeah, there is a lot of talk now. I mean, I don't know if you've been down this deuterium rabbit hole. But,
not really, but I've heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's fascinating, that this might be at the root of aging. And it also points to the efficacy of the carnivore diet, because when you're eating really high fats from animals that have been fed their proper diet, then it's very low in deuterium and actually causes the cells to produce their own deuterium depleted water. And you find that in a lot of these blue zones where the vegans lie and say that they're on plant-based diets, which they aren't, obviously. There's a whole load of deception about that, but they're quite often in areas where there's very low deuterium water supply and whatever. And apparently, we should be living to 120 or so. And if the mitochondria aren't blown up by the deuterium that's, in the fruits and whatever, and in all the processed food and in the water that we get from the tap or the faucet, as you guys say. But I think it's a great one if anybody wants to look into this, or Dr. Laszlo Boros. And he's done a couple of interviews with us, but he's also a 1962 Gemini drummer like me. And so I understand him. But he's, not when he goes into the science, but he's very cool. And he said something really interesting when we last interviewed him, which was, I think more and more people are realizing the real dangers of seed oils and just how horrific they are. And they were never designed as food in the first place. But he was saying that, to deplete deuterium in the body, to reduce the chances of autoimmunity, cancer, whatever, it's possible. And nature has ways of doing that if it's taken in through carbohydrate sources like berries and, fruits and nuts and whatever in season. But when it goes in via seed oils, you can't get it out. And it just stays in there, and you have to sort of end up doing like, I don't know, an 11-day dry fast or something if you're lucky. But the huge rates of cancer since the seed oils came in. And it just seems to point, it's just one of those other things, ways of looking at it. If you look away from all the diet gurus, suddenly you can see, you look into anthropology, you look into deuterium, you look at it, and it just seems to explain why it is that you've stayed so healthy and I've regained my health from multiple autoimmune and metabolic diseases, eh?
Yeah.
The logic isn't there, is there? Because where are the studies?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's the thing, Alan Savory pointed out, that people are saying, you want study. Where's your study? Where's your this? Where's your that? And he said that, that's not science. That's not what science is. That's academia. And if you're the only thing that matters is a study, then you're not really doing science. And there are so many bad studies out there. I mean, they are just terrible. In the humanities, this is a good example. In the humanities, 80% of the studies and the papers published have 0 citations. 0. So that is insane. I mean, you're talking about probably millions of papers and studies that people in that field just looked at like, that's useless. Like, there's nowhere to go with that. 80%, that's wild. So studies mean F all, really. But a well-designed study is very useful. You have a properly controlled, double-blinded study with a placebo group and so forth. That can give you a lot of very good information, but they don't always, and you don't always design them very well. And also, it's very important to understand that there is evidence that exists outside of the randomized controlled study. We had, going back to the ancient Greeks, we had the idea of logic and so forth, being able to figure out what is fundamentally true just through logical thought and debate. And just like there's no randomized control study to show that parachutes work, there are also no randomized control trials to show that the Pythagorean theorem works. But it does. It's been mathematically proven. It's been logically proven. And you can take a little bit of logic to realize that parachutes are probably a good idea as well if you're going to jump out of an airplane. And so the people that get stuck on like, no, I want to say, well, you don't have a study that shows this exact thing about carnivore. I was like, so what?
Yeah, but Anthony, I mean, in the last little while, if your parachute didn't open, you still died of COVID.
Yeah, well, that's true. Or you could have, exactly. And or there was a great one where this lady, I forget where she was from. She was a medical examiner in the U.S. somewhere, and she was just pointing out that there were so many more COVID deaths being reported than had actually been. And it's a small town. She's the only pathologist there. She's like, no, excuse me, that's not what I put on my form. And, she said that there was an actual murder suicide, very tragic case of a guy, killing his partner and then killing himself. They put it down as COVID deaths. And she's like, I'm sorry, that is not what that is. And so, God even knows if they even were positive with COVID, but they were, they didn't die from that regardless. And so, yeah, you see a lot of that. And so again, perfect example of why you really can't necessarily trust studies or data and so forth. And again, we just touched on multiple studies that were, world renowned and, very, very highly thought of, and were complete bunk. And, tenured Harvard professors, head of the USDA and so forth, that we have documentation showing that they were corrupt actors and purposely pushing out false information and so forth. So when you look at these things and you add these things up together, you don't necessarily need a study. Studies are great. I think it would be great to start doing more studies. There's a Harvard study that came out that showed actually quite
just about to put that up. Yeah.
So it was an epidemiological study, and a lot of these things can be pretty crap, but if they're very well designed and very carefully done, you can actually get pretty good information from that. And they found that everyone improved, and everyone found that their different sort of medical issues, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, they improved it significantly, all of them. So that's quite interesting. And it was with 2,000 people, and these are epidemiological studies. These aren't perfect. They aren't controlled, but it's a very, very good proof of concept and a grant proposal for a larger, actually controlled study to actually look at this sort of thing. And so I think that's going to start opening the door. And the more that this becomes mainstream, because people can see evidence that doesn't exist in a randomized controlled trial, that more and more people are going to be reversing their own issues and getting better and getting healthier. And people are going to have to start taking notice. And with the advent of this Harvard trial, I think that legitimizes things quite a bit. And so that people in academia can actually start doing bigger studies as well, because it's fresh, it's unbroken ground. You could really make a name for yourself putting out big publications and big studies on this, because no one else has. So everyone knows about this Harvard study because it's the only one of really, really looking specifically at this. So these guys, their names are enshrined now, and you can really make a name for yourself if you do this. And I think people will, now that that's out and more people are showing clear benefits. And we're rediscovering things, because there were studies just in the hundreds going back to the 1800s showing all of this stuff. Like nothing I'm saying is new. Like Salsbury knew pretty much all of this, except for maybe the molecular details of all these sorts of things. But he wrote an entire book about called the relation of alimentation and disease. Alimentation being what you eat. Your alimentary tract is your digestive tract. So the relationship between food and disease. And I'm writing a book at the moment, basically arguing the exact same thing, that these so-called chronic diseases that we treat are not diseases per se, but toxicities. And toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet and a lack of species-specific nutrition. So namely, too many plants, not enough meat. And he wrote this book 150 years ago. You probably don't even need to hear it from me. I'm just talking about it in more of a current context.
I think this has been covered up for so long. The stuff that you're talking about there, and some of that is new to me, and I'd love to hear more about that. Well, I'd like to get you on maybe into our members area where we can talk about lots of the stuff that we probably couldn't talk about here. Sure. Stuff. But I used to write sort of plant-based books, and I used to be very keen on Ayurvedic medicine, and looked into that an awful lot. And even that has been horrendously perverted. When you look back into the old texts that are thousands of years old, the Bhava Prakash, the Charak Samhita, they're saying that the most nourishing food for the body is the meat of freshly killed animals. And they're saying it's like amrit, like nectar. And nowadays, all the Ayurvedic practitioners, at least in the West, are saying, oh, no, you have to be vegetarian. They're all living on rice and dal, just grains and pulses, and they're all sick. And I was, obviously, when I ate that for decades. And it was funny, I have a son who's 32 as well. And we brought him up veggie, and it didn't do him any good. In fact, his neck x-ray now is incredible. It's just all titanium. He had a whole vertebrectomy because he had an aneurysmal bone cyst at about 11. And I'm sure this was probably autoimmune and diet related, Everything is to a certain extent. But he went out for a panchakarma treatment to Kerala in India. And 10 years ago, maybe, or more. 10 years ago, would have been 10 years ago or so. And he said to the Vaidya there, what would you have done for my dad? Because he's reversed his arthritis on meat and fat and stuff like that. And the guy said, absolutely spot on. It would have been brains and meat and lots of ghee. I just still don't think it's completely ideal, but still it's right there, And these guys know it, who are in touch with the real old texts. And I think it's been covered up for years. I mean, we did this Red Pill Revolution book recently, but that was just to show really how the elites have sort of fooled us. But now we're just on the edge of publishing the Red Pill Food Revolution book. And we've gone into, it's 5 of us who have co-authored it. We do it in a crazy way with Zoom calls, and Ben Hunt, a wonderful writer, writes it all up that we say. But the whole thing has been covered up about food and how it's happened. And then even to sort of reflect what's happening now, the possibility of the rise of the psychopath with agriculture. Because in a hunter-gatherer society, there's no real place for these psychopaths to be up the top. And the whole thing, you look at the depth of it and how we have been controlled by food and horrendous misinformation, often through the religious and spiritual channels, has been incredible over the years. But it's all there in the old texts. It's even there in the Bible, isn't it, I hear? God didn't like the crops from Cain and Abel. He wanted the fatty meat.
Yeah, exactly. And, speaking about, the traditional sort of Indian views on things. I have a friend of mine who was, neurosurgical resident with me, and has subsequently moved on to a different specialty. But he's ethnically and traditionally Indian. His parents are very traditional. They only, I think they're ovo-lacto vegetarians, but they very, very plant-based. And he was eating that way as well. And he was strict vegan for a long time, and he was doing it for health reasons. He was being told, "Oh, this is the healthiest thing you can do," and so forth. And he was very sick. He was very weak. He's taller than me. I'm 6'3". He's probably 6'4", 6'5", but very skinny, very lanky, and quite pale. Sort of sickly pale. Didn't look vigorous and healthy. And he was just sitting there chatting with me after, a meeting we had on a Saturday. And we just got into talking about all this and nutrition and so forth. So I just, started telling him about it and why I only eat meat and avoid everything else. And he was, very interested. Like, wow, that's crazy. And, I started just, quoting texts and quoting studies and saying like, yeah, I can send you a bunch of resources. I can send you a bunch of studies. Like, yeah, please do. And so I sent him all this stuff. He's a very studious guy. He really, really digs into these sorts of things. So he really went after this and really started researching and stuff. Everything I sent him, he read and continued on reading more things himself. And he went full carnivore. After that, went from strict vegan to full carnivore. He was saying at the time, at the hospital that we're at, he said just walking up from the ground floor up to 2 flights of stairs up to our office, he would get out of breath. He'd actually have to stop. He'd actually have to stop and catch his breath. He's not fat. He was not overweight. He was underweight, if anything. And a young guy, he's in his late 20s. So this is not something that should have been happening to anybody at that age and description. As soon as he went on a carnivore diet, just completely reversed all that, just felt amazing, started lifting weights. Guy's huge now. He's just jacked. And God, he must have stacked on, like, I don't know, probably like 20, 30 kilos of muscle. The guy just got ripped. And his brain fog went away. His brain started working again. Everything got better. So one of the things he was researching was the history that you're talking about. And he said that there was a switch around, I think, 1100 AD, where it was almost like a sort of a political commercial sort of move. There was another religion coming in and sort of competing, and they were like taking followers. So they wanted to basically have a gimmick to make them more unique and get people back. And that was what they came up with. Say, oh, you have to be kind on animals. It's all spiritual. And, it's cow sacred sort of thing. Before that, he said in the original text, it was like, when you have someone, you have a special guest come over, you must sacrifice a bull and have a feast. And he said all these rituals and all these traditions all revolved around slaughtering a bull and having a feast. It was always a feast of meat, feast of meat, feast of meat, feast of meat. And it was that change for, political popularity purposes, whatever it was, that actually switched over. This was not in the original text. This was not part of the original doctrine. And so, that was very interesting. It's been going on for a long time, but I think you're right that things change and we don't necessarily know why. We don't always ask questions. And the same thing happened with cholesterol and so forth. We completely changed the entire course of humanity by just saying, "Ooh, cholesterol is bad." So what does that mean? That means you have to be healthy. You have to stop eating meat, especially red meat and eggs. You have to eat more things that don't have cholesterol, because that was the only thing that mattered, was if it had cholesterol. If it didn't have cholesterol, it was good for you by definition. That's why they had bags of candy that said fat-free. Okay. Heroin is fat-free. Okay. Go try to survive on that.
Good point.
But we had that change.
The things that you say about that guy, the vegetarian, lacto-ovo vegetarian, I mean, I see the same thing so much up here, because I moved up here where I am at the moment in the north of England from the south of England to be a part of this transcendental meditation community. I thought, right, I'm going to give up being a musician. I was sick of it. I want to just be a yogi the rest of my life. So anyway, I moved up here, and at that time they were all reasonably healthy, and then the slide down into ill health has been so marked. And now the guys, I'm 60 this year, but some of these guys are like 5-10 years older than me, most of them. And I have lost so many friends to cancer. I'm not really part of this. There's as much bullshit in the spiritual community as there is in the diet community. So I'm right on the fringes of it, but I still know these people. They're sort of grouped up a couple of streets away from me pretty much. But there's quite a lot of them. I don't know, maybe 400 or 500 at a certain time. But there's a video I've got on my channel, on my YouTube channel. If anybody wants to look at it, it's called "Why Spiritual People Still Die of Cancer." And it's not all dietary, but, the only two people I know in this whole community who've reversed a serious illness is me and my mother. I sent you that vid of her breast cancer reversal, and in her 90s. And, but they are sliding down. I've lost so many of my friends to cancer, I mean, 2 on the same day a couple of years ago. And it's just crazy. The cancer rates among the people who are eating like that are higher than the local sort of McDonald's eating population, as far as I can see. And what they do quite often, they sort of start to crave a bit of protein. So then they go, oh, well, I must add a bit of chicken and fish. And they do that, and it does nothing once it's all there with all the lectins from the grains and the pulses that they're eating. And so, I can't eat that. It made me feel even worse. Yeah, of course it did.
Right.
The thing is, what I keep saying, it's not about eating meat. This isn't a magic medicine. It's about cutting all the plants, isn't it? But it's so hard to get through their cognitive dissonance. Even when they kind of accept it, quite a lot of them, they just still go on, they still die. Autoimmunity and cancer running rife among the spiritual community because they're influenced by that Indian diet,
Yeah, and you hit the nail right on the head with that. It's not just eating meat. Meat isn't the cure. Meat isn't curing anything. It's just basic sustenance. The cure is removing the poison, and that is what this is. That's why I call this a poison. That's why I call this a toxicity, because it is. When you have exposure to lead, you get lead poisoning. We could look at this at a molecular level and see exactly what's happening biochemically and figure out some novel molecule and drug to mitigate these reactions and have you die slowly over 40 years, or you could figure out that this is actually a poisoning. This is not a disease. And you remove the offending agent, and all of a sudden, the issue goes away. And that's what we see when you remove the offending agent. These people's problems go away. Diabetes goes away. Heart disease goes away. Autoimmune disorders go away. I'm not saying that it's going to cure every single problem out there, but it's going to cure every single problem out there that's being caused by these poisons. That's definitely true. And you're also.
I have an autoimmunity course out there, an online autoimmunity course with like 30 video thing, and it's called the subtraction method, because this is what it's about. And this is my favorite expression about that is, if you're sitting on a nail, don't take an aspirin for the pain. Get off the fucking nail, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that's exactly it. We're treating symptoms. We're not treating the disease, mostly because people don't know what the hell is causing the disease. But instead of actually trying to figure that out, people just go like, it's something happens. And so let's suppress the immune system. Well, the immune system's going apeshit for a reason. And, you may want to try and figure that out. And when you have a cause and effect relationship of, these genetically susceptible people getting rheumatoid arthritis or gout or Crohn's or whatever, and you all of a sudden you can reverse that by removing something from their diet, something from their environment. That's a very straightforward relationship, and it's essentially one-to-one. I mean, I have yet to meet a patient or someone who's reached out to me and I've discussed this with that has failed that. I'm sure there are people out there, but I would argue that they probably haven't eliminated everything out of their diet yet. They probably haven't eliminated everything out. And a lot of people, they go carnivore, or they think they go carnivore because it's just about eating meat, right? So they eat a lot more meat. That's not carnivore. Carnivore is, the subtraction method, like you say, it's not eating all the other crap. And that's what I try to stress to patients and friends is that it's eating meat is definitely good. But the real trick is not eating all the other things, because it's the other things that are causing the problems in the first place. And so it's really important to get rid of that. And a lot of people have a really hard time getting really just pure down to just meat and water. And a lot of them will say like, oh, well, they're doing so much better. Everything's great, but, they're still having this issue or that issue. Maybe they have diarrhea, or maybe they don't have the exercise tolerance that, I have. And they say, oh, why isn't it working for me? And every time I pick at it and I pull at it, it turns out that they're using stevia in their coffee, which, neither of which you're supposed to have. Or having, sweetening things with like monk fruit, sugar and stuff like that. And I wish carnivore would have worked for me because it really helped my autoimmune disease, but, I didn't lose weight and I didn't really feel that great. And I'm like, well, you haven't actually tried it yet. You've eliminated most of the poisons. And so you've gotten rid of most of the poisoning, but there's still stuff in there, and there's still room to improve.
Exactly. I think one of the most common things I get when I do a consult, and it's funny because I sort of sometimes have to pinch myself at the amazing results I get because I'm a drummer, right? Like I said to that oncologist when I'd seen cancer reversals and he hadn't, and I'm a drummer, I have to pinch myself. But I do these consults because I've kind of been through it and I've taken all the wrong turns. And most of the things I see are people who come to me with autoimmunity either at the start and then they're fine, you can get them on the track. But if there's a problem, it's like I've tried carnivore, and, when you are very autoimmune, when the gut's very leaky and everything's really kicking off and flaring, it's like Zofia Clements told me when we were at our last carnivore conference in Spain, and Zofia from Paleomedicina, she came along and she was saying even a few molecules of dairy can keep these things flaring up sometimes, and just tiny things. And then I realized that people are eating a load of pork, chicken, and egg whites, and that's fantastic. If you've got a healthy gut, or you're just somebody who's got diabetes, because that shouldn't even be classed as an illness. I don't think it's so easy to get rid of. Mm-hmm. But when you're trying to get rid of the autoimmunity, I know that when I was really sick, if I ate an egg white or if I ate some chicken, I'd be in agony. And, to cut that out for a while, I can eat it now and again. I don't really base my diet on it. I'll eat it maybe once a month or something like that. But it's lamb and beef, basically. It's still fatty lamb and beef. And that really seems to be the sweet spot, with the high fat as well. Often they're eating too much protein and not enough fat, and they're saying, oh, well, Sean Baker eats all that or whatever, and you're going, yeah, but he doesn't have a leaky gut and he's training hugely. Right now, you don't want to be focusing on training and getting huge. You need to just get sorted out. In fact, that was one of the most amazing things that made me realize that my gut was, that my gut was knacked, but also that all of dietary knowledge was nonsense. Because I ran a gym in the late 90s and I got pretty big. And I used to train people. I used to write for Hard Gainer magazine and whatever, which I loved because they'd sorted out the sort of abbreviated training rather than the, let's follow the Flex magazine things for the steroid boys and all that, which doesn't really generally work for people. And I got big, but I never got lean, I wasn't fat, but I was never lean. I never got a set of abs. And then I got my first set of abs in 2012. At 50 years old, lying on the sofa, eating nothing but fatty meat, trying to recover from rheumatoid arthritis. And I got a set of abs. And I'm like, hold on, everything's wrong here. Everything's upside down.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what they say, abs are made in the kitchen. And it's very true. You can have all the musculature that you want, but if it's covered in a layer of fat, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many sit-ups you do after that point. I often say that it's the last 5% of going pure carnivore that gives you about 95% of the results. And there's a lot of reasons for that because, it's not, every gram of something bad doesn't give you an equal response and degradation to your health. If you look at carbohydrates, for instance, when you eat just a small amount of carbohydrates, this raises your insulin stays up for quite some time. Insulin, blocks proteolysis, it blocks lipolysis. In layman's terms, it forces energy into your cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of your cells. And so when your insulin goes up, you have now locked down your fat cells. And so you cannot access them. And so now you have to keep eating carbs to maintain your blood sugar because your body can't do it for you now. Your body's very, very efficient at maintaining its own levels and taking care of itself. So just the idea that you have to, micromanage your own blood sugar levels, that seems very off to me anyway, just knowing how the rest of the body works. And so when you don't do that, your body takes care of it. When you eat carbohydrates, even a little bit of carbohydrates, and it raises that insulin up and that stays up for generally around 24 hours, 18 to 24 hours, it's shut down your entire metabolic system. And so you feel like crap. And now your blood sugar's going to be low all day because, you're not eating any more carbohydrates to give you the energy and your body can't produce them. And so you feel like crap. So just that little bit of carbs actually derailed you significantly. It completely kicked you out of your main metabolic state, which is where all of your heavy machinery comes to bear biochemically. And it's where we have tons of studies showing the benefits of fasting and so forth. The benefits of fasting are not food deprivation. The benefits of fasting is not eating stupid shit and not specifically not eating carbohydrates, because then you get into a fasting metabolism. And we find that people in a fasted metabolism have the same benefits of people who fast. And so you have to ask yourself, well, maybe that's our primary metabolic state then. And maybe the food that keeps us in that state are more in keeping with what we've been biologically designed to eat. And so just a little bit of carbohydrates kicks you out of that. Dairy has some carbs as well. And it can screw you there too. So just getting rid of that last little bit, it is such a huge hurdle. And as far as your health is concerned, it does so much for your health. Artificial sweeteners and so forth, people don't realize this, but that can also raise your blood sugar. They think, just because I'm not eating carbs, I'm not eating carbs. And that's fine, but you're eating something that emulates carbs and elicits a similar reaction in your body as carbs. And so you're getting the same damage insofar as you're changing your metabolic state, which is very, very significant. And so just getting rid of those last little things just makes a massive difference.
It does. Yeah. And I mean, on the fasting thing, one of the reasons I think I ended up so skinny, particularly apart from the fact I wasn't taking in any proper nutrition on that vegan thing, was that every time I ate, I'd get horrendous pain because obviously I was eating all the crap and the plant toxins. So I'd end up fasting for longer and longer periods. And I remember the longest I did was 11 days on just water. And now there are, which, nowadays, when you see these fasting groups, that's actually kind of baby steps. That is supposed to be, according to the Russian literature, the way to blow up any type of cancer is to do an 11-day dry fast, to really get the stem cells going and to get all the autophagy and apoptosis kicking in. And apparently on the sort of, I think, 8th and 10th days, you have something called some acidotic crisis or something. And that blows up it's extraordinary research. It's very interesting. There's a YouTube channel called the Phoenix Protocol with August Dunning in his book, but he refers back to the Russians who've done this stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. But I tell you one thing that we're having quite a lot of success with is something that we were inspired by with this is Dr. Jeremy Ayres is doing this a lot as well, who I work with in the Red Pill guys and the Human Unleashed thing. And I'm sure you'll meet him at some point. You must come on with all of us. It'll be fun.
Yeah,
but he's been doing these protocols. We learned about it really from a guy. I won't mention his name because he's kept himself very much under the radar. He's fixed so many people's cancer over the last few decades that, you know, he's kept under the radar and hasn't ended up face down in a swimming pool for doing it, you know. And he had this protocol where he was feeding people for 1 day and then fasting them for 3 days and then feeding them for 1 day, fasting them for 3 days. And he was getting all sorts of things, beautiful results where he was having taking pictures of the retina for people and seeing actually new blood vessels growing back into the retinas on his clients and everything, and all sorts of reversals of all kinds of things. But he came along to the carnivore conference because he realized that it was an awful lot more effective if that feasting day was pure carnivore. And it was working a whole load better than even his previous protocols that had been reversing the cancer, because it was getting some nutrition into them. And we've actually seen some weight increases in sort of MS people who are doing the fasting and feasting thing when they weren't increasing their weight every day. I think sometimes the gut is just so incredibly delicate at a certain stage, it can't take meat, you know, but I just, even meat, you know, too often. But I just say to people, where did our intuition go? You know, eat when you're, to the autoimmune people, eat when you're really, really hungry, eat a load of fatty meat until you're full, and then wait until you're hungry again. Because people go, how many times do I eat? How much do I have to eat? How much? And it's like, did our intuition go? Eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full, and don't eat too late at night. And that's it, really. It's kind of simple.
Yeah, I get a lot of people asking, you know, for a meal plan if I do individualized meal plans and so forth, and they're trying to, you know, pay me to do this, and I can't do that. It's like, look, it's really simple. I'll just tell you for free. It's just one paragraph. Just, you know, eat fatty meat. Don't eat all the other crap. Drink water to thirst. Eat until you're satiated. Listen to your taste. If meat tastes good, that means you're hungry. Your body wants the nutrients. Keep going until it doesn't taste as good, and then stop. And that's it. That's your meal plan. You know, eat whatever the hell animal that you want, whatever moves and had a face. Like, just do it, and whatever you prefer and whatever you like and enjoy makes you feel the best. You know, and so, you know, I direct people to my Instagram because I do a lot of posts just talking about little things like this and talking about, you know, meal plan. I was just like, well, listen, I'm happy to help you and do this with you if you really want to, but why don't you read these posts first? And if you get the information you need, then that's great. And if not, and you want more, then we can do something. Most people don't come back. They're like, yeah, no, that's it, because it is very simple. You know exactly what you can eat. You know exactly what you can't eat. You can eat whenever you want. Doesn't matter time of day or night. It really doesn't matter unless you're eating carbohydrates. If you eat right before you go to bed, and you have whatever portion feels right to you. And so this is very, very straightforward. And so I'm like, I can't take your money just to tell you that. I've already told you that. Like, I've got nothing else. Like, that's it, you know? And so I'd feel like a fraud to like just sit there and just repeat the same thing again. Talking about the gut, you're right. You know, some people have very, very damaged guts. And this is something that Salsbury actually found out. This is why he made the Salsbury steak. The Salsbury steak was a way of grinding down beef in a particular fashion that it filtered out the gristle of the beef. So it only got just the meat and just the fat, and all the gristle stuff was filtered out of it. And this was because, you know, he was treating people that had extremely poor guts. And, you know, I mean, this is 100 years before we had any feasible treatment for Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, people having, you know, copious bloody diarrhea and just in so much pain. And so this was something, when you took the gristle out, you would absorb basically 100% of it. And so none of it would go out through your colon. And so this completely rested your bowel, and you can do this in other ways as well. But, even now we use this as a low residue diet when we're trying to rest the bowel, when you've had bowel surgery or you've had diverticulitis or appendicitis or something like that. We're treating conservatively. We're not removing them operatively. And so people get put on a low residue diet. So things that don't have fiber. things that don't, make you excrete waste. And this helps. This helps your body rest and heal and so forth. Well, that's what meat is. And then, as soon as everyone, things get healed, they go, oh, now you need to eat a bunch of fiber because that's really good for your gut. Well, if it was good for your gut, why wasn't it good for your gut 5 minutes ago? Shouldn't it be something, shouldn't something that's good for your gut be beneficial in times of stress and strain? You would think so, and you don't take antibiotics every time you don't have an infection. Oh, they're really good for you. Antibiotics are really good for you. Oh, but no, you don't want to take that crap when you're actually sick. That it's just backwards. And so that's what Salsbury was doing. And so you get these things. You have basically no residue. You just weren't passing waste. And so you completely rested your bowel. And so you're right. These people that were, and he actually, I read an article of his in the late 1800s when someone was talking about the Salisbury steak, and basically misrepresented it as just sort of ground beef. And he wrote a letter to the editor and said, no, this is really important. There's a very specific way of doing this. This is very, very important because there are people that have such bad gut and so much pain and it's such a hard time. You cannot just eat ground beef. You have to grind this in a very specific way so that it takes out all of the gristle. He called it the fiber of the meat. And so he found this as well, that you really, really had to be, some of these people were so unwell that any residue was too much. And so, like you're saying, Dr. Baker or you now or myself, maybe we can eat these sorts of things without a problem. But the people that are still recovering, that are still quite sick, they really can't. And so, it's something that we've been seeing for 150 years, and that's again another treatment with the carnivore diet, and specifically the Salisbury steak is just the end all be all. This is how you rest your gut and recover from these sorts of things.
That's fantastic. I mean, they've still misinterpreted it these days, though, haven't they? I mean, I remember a good friend of mine called me up from hospital, and he said, I've got such bad ulcerative colitis. I'm in here now. I'm in tremendous pain. And they got me on watch because they think it might perforate and they might have to take out my colon and all this. And they said, but they've got me on a low residue diet. I said, what's that? He said, well, I have to have white bread rather than brown bread. And I went back going, this is not a low residue diet. I'm going to bring in some stuff for you. So we took him in some thermos, with warm bone broths with sort of ground beef in it and some fat, some extra tallow and whatever. And he went, this is exactly what they told me not to eat. He said, give it to me. Because he didn't trust it. And he ate it and he went on to eat that, and he got out of hospital and he didn't have to have any surgery. And then he carried on eating like that, and he went back and they put cameras up and they said, only tiny patches of inflammation now. And then it went, and like beautiful results. And, he was in there and they said, okay, well, you got to eat a load of white bread. Like, come on.
Yeah, no. And yeah, exactly. And so, they got one part right, was, fiber bad. But, there's more out there. And, we get very myopic. People do. We look at, there's just one thing and that's it. That's the one-stop shop. This is what's bad. Cholesterol. That's it. As long as you don't eat cholesterol, nothing else matters. Then you get, the ketogenic sort of thing. Carbohydrates. As long as it's not carbohydrate, then it's like, well, God damn it, guys. There's so much out there that is actually really bad for you. And so, it's more than that. And you have to, recognize that. To your point, I have so many people reaching out to me, because I did a talk on YouTube and on my podcast on Spotify that, just specifically about autoimmune and looking at the history of this. And there were multiple books and, just hundreds of studies talking about this since the 1800s. And, as recently as 1975, there's a Dr. Vogelin, so Voegtlin. He was a gastroenterologist, and he was basically writing about all this and just saying, oh, look, we're in his book called The Stone Age Diet. And he basically argued that, these diseases, again, are just being caused by the food you eat. And, he just basically argued that he didn't need to exist as a profession, as a gastroenterologist, as long as you didn't eat plants. And then, 1977 hit, and that all got thrown out the window. So this actually comes up right up to that mark, and then it just gets tossed. But interestingly, there was several studies recently looking at specifically Crohn's, and then some with ulcerative colitis as well. Most of these were with Crohn's, that an elemental diet, which is basically you just break down, you think of it as like almost like pet food, like an Ensure thing, where you're just getting the basic nutrients that you need outside of the plant or animal that it came from, and you just take out, this is how many calories, this is how much vitamin this and vitamin that and fat and so forth. So you get this elemental diet that has those core nutrients, and obviously it's going to have way more carbs than you're going to want, but at least it didn't have all the other crap that came in your garden salad. And they found that when putting Crohn's patients on an elemental diet, this had better efficacy for acute flare-ups and for keeping people in remission than steroids. So steroids are the mainstay for these autoimmune diseases, and they found that just putting people on this diet was better than steroids, and that people put on a low residue, low fiber, low carbohydrate diet, they found that this was able to keep people on remission with Crohn's on average of 51 weeks. So, and only like a 10% sort of recurrence rate per year. And contrast that with the control group that, was a normal high fiber diet and things like that. They kept 0 people out of remission for any period of time. So, this is very, very strong evidence that, again, it's the food causing the disease. And if you remove that, you get rid of the disease. And there's tons of people that have been reaching out to me, and I'm sure reached out to you, saying that, especially in response to that autoimmune video that I did, talking about how, they went carnivore and they reversed their Crohn's, reversed their ulcerative colitis, reversed their rheumatoid arthritis, and so forth. And they had the colonoscopies. And again, they found no evidence of disease, no evidence of inflammation, and so forth. And again, this is just completely counterintuitive. It goes against everything that we've been told to think and believe and to do, but it's right. And, when you have people doing the wrong thing, but getting the right results, you really have to question the advice you're giving to people. Unfortunately, not many people are. I have a friend of mine who had kidney disease. He had chronic kidney disease. He was like 35, and he had something like 19% kidney function. And he sort of made a couple of comments on Instagram several years ago about how, he was dealing with this and his kidney function is just getting slowly worse. He was eating, it was like, low protein, eat a bunch of plants. He was a huge power lifter. He did strongman competition. So he'd, previously eaten a lot of protein. Oh, that's what did it. That's what killed your kidneys. You really got to get rid of all that crap. And they put him on all these medications, and his kidney function is just getting slowly worse. And they're like, oh, well, imagine if we weren't giving you all this great advice and medication, imagine how fast that would go. And he sort of commented like, this is sort of a slow progression to the end. And, I may not be able to see my daughter graduate high school, and so I just sort of reached out to him, and just early on in my research into this, and just say, hey, look, there's all this research showing, that oxalates and so forth is actually bang up your kidneys. These and other things are found in plants, and they really screw up your kidneys in a lot of different ways. And that, there are all these studies that actually show that high protein diets don't actually cause kidney dysfunction and damage to your kidneys. That's been debunked. That was a speculation, and it sounded good at the time, but when you actually did the studies, found the exact opposite results. And I was like, and you're avoiding these plants, you're giving your body something good, and humans actually are carnivores. This is how our body's supposed to work. I think you would find benefit from this. And I've seen people in different carnivore groups on Facebook and so forth who had literally come off dialysis by going on a carnivore diet, which is crazy. Like that, I don't think that's really ever happened before outside of that. And so I told him, and he said, you know what, screw it. Like I've got nothing to lose. And, you've been, sending me these articles and things like that. It all makes sense. I'm going to give it a try. He went nearly carnivore. I think he went practically fully carnivore, maybe full carnivore for a while. But anyway, started doing that. His doctor lost it, absolutely lost it. He's like, you're going to die. You're going to kill yourself. If you don't do this, you have to take these meds. You have to eat this way, or that's it for you. And he said, you know what, screw you. Your advice has been getting me worse. I'm going to try something. And in 3 months, he was back up to 80% kidney function. And his doctor was still trying to get him to take the damn meds and still trying to get him off. Okay, well, you got lucky, but you really got to get all this stuff. It's like, dude, this is not, This is not Vegas. It's not just like, oh, you got to be careful, get out of there now, or you're going to crap out and you're going to lose all that you gain. No, it's what he was doing was giving him the benefit. And again, like cognitive dissonance, like you're seeing the results in front of your face happen in real time. And you have that contrast with all your other patients that are only getting worse by your advice. You need to think and have a bit of introspection and insight into your own practice, because what you're doing is wrong. It was a guy we talked about with Bart, Garth Davies, like that jackass, like this guy, he's a bariatric surgeon, and we got into it online, and the guy was I don't know, he's just not very smart. Him and Nodalski, like I was not really impressed with these guys' arguments. And they got around my arguments by blocking me and then responding to my thing. Oh yeah, well, what about this? And so I found out about that. And so I made other accounts and went on and be like, well, asshole, all this. And this guy is a bariatric surgeon. So this guy does surgeries to, gut people so that they can't physically fit as much food into their body. And so they starve themselves. And this guy's pushing a plant-based diet and so forth. And I just pointed out to him, I was like, look, buddy, if your diet was such a good idea, your recommendation to your own patients worked so well, you should not have a job. You should not be able to do any of these surgeries. These are extremely expensive surgeries. They cost $30,000, $40,000 just for the surgery. Not to mention all the follow-up care and the complications and reoperations and so forth. They're life-threatening. All surgery is, but this is particularly dangerous in a lot of ways. Carries a high burden of side effects and morbidity after the fact. And so, you're causing harm, and your recommendations are pushing more people into harm's way. And so you're either extremely dishonest and knowingly pushing people into the wrong thing, or you're just an idiot because you can't see what's in front of your face. You're telling people, eat this way and we won't have to do surgery. And they get fatter and fatter and sicker and sicker. And you go, they must not have been listening to me. Nodalski did the same thing. He said that, I was like, oh, I've been cutting my calories, but I can't lose weight. And he said, yeah, well, that means you're lying. He has a stupid little meme. The guy does a lot of memes. They're really lame. I mean, you're a grown ass man, it's just like, no, we should be like, no, you shouldn't be making memes all day, like a child. And that was it. It's just like, oh, you should cut your calories. Just say, no, oh, I have cut my calories, but I can't lose weight. And then the response was, you're lying. Great. That's really witty. You're an idiot. Like, that's my response to that, is because, your biochemistry is a little more complex than that. There are calories that exist in, tablecloth. Okay. Your body can't access those the same as it can from a glass of juice. And that doesn't, get carried out the same way as a fatty steak or bacon or lettuce. These things are chemicals. They have different chemical responses in your body. And anybody with any inkling of biology, as any doctor really should, because you had to take a lot of prerequisites in the basic sciences to just get into medical school, you should understand that. And so just saying that calories in, calories out is nonsensical. And their results are bad. They're getting bad results. And so they're either, bad actors and intentionally misleading people for their own profit, or they're idiots. And like, either way, you should not be trusting these people with your health.
Exactly. When I really started to fix myself, I hadn't cut all the plants, but I cut most of them, and things got dramatically better. And it was, I think, 2012 or something like that. And some appointment popped up with my rheumatologist. It was just a repeat checkup thing. I hadn't booked one because my medical file is like that thick up to 2012, and then it stops. It's gone, because I don't want to go to these people. But I went back and I thought, I'll take that appointment just to show him what I've done, because I'm jumping around. I'm absolutely fine, And I went back, and I was sitting in a waiting room among all these very overweight people with their joints bandaged up. They were on crutches. They were eating chocolate bars and biscuits out of their handbags and whatever, They're in a terrible state. I was the only one in the waiting room who could actually get up and sort of run around. And I went into the office and I showed him. I said, check out what I've done. Do you want to know how I've done this? And he goes, you should be taking methotrexate. And I said, why? And he said, well, because it's just, even if you've done that, it's going to go to your heart and your lungs, and that'll kill you. And then you've got risk of malignancies. And I was like, what? And then he got so angry with me because I wouldn't take the methotrexate. He was actually foaming at the corner of the mouth. And I said to him, if that happens, it can be a sign of heart disease, And he went absolutely ballistic. And I ran out of there, and I've never been back. And so I've been really wary of docs. But there was one point, my mum, a couple of years before we noticed the cancer, she had tremendous reflux, and she had all sorts of gastro issues. Reflux, she was, the food would just sort of come up as soon as she'd eaten it, and she was in a terrible way. And so I said, well, we better check if this is nothing horrendous, And so I thought she's not going to put up with a camera. So she did this barium swallow thing, And they said, as they always do, oh, you've got hiatus hernia. I mean, they told me that years ago. I never had any trouble with it since. I cut all the plants. But and they said, yeah, you got hiatus hernia, blah, blah. And so we went to the gastroenterologist, and I'd heard about this guy. He was a real sort of well-known high-up gastroenterologist around here, renowned for being really sort of outspoken and strict and whatever. I thought, I'm going to have trouble with this dude. And I went in there with my mum, and however old your kid is, however much they know, they're still idiots, if they're your kids. Yeah. So I was sitting there, and I said to him, look, what is your view of it? And I was saying, look, I've reversed my rheumatoid arthritis. I've seen a lot of these gut issues go with taking out all the plants, taking out the fiber, getting on bone broths and fatty meat and that kind of thing. And he was looking at me. I couldn't really tell what he was thinking. I thought, he's going to have a go at me in a minute. They always do. And my mum sort of interrupted me and said, look, so what are you going to do for me? Because obviously the stuff I was saying was an idiot. And he just turned to my mum and said, if you do everything your son said, you won't need me at all. And my jaw hit the floor, her jaw hit the floor. And it was like, that's why she trusted me, I think, with when she got the breast cancer, because she thought, well, okay, it fixed that. And that doc said so. Because you guys are held up as absolute gods, aren't you? And I mean, some of the guys out there are putting out such misinformation. How do you find it is with your colleagues there, particularly? I mean, you're in surgery, right? But if you run into into dietitians and things like that, who are quite often the fattest people in the hospital. So what sort of reaction are you getting? Do you keep it quiet, or do you talk to them about it? What are you getting in your where you work?
It is pretty well known, how I think and believe, and I think it helps because I am in good shape, and I played professional sports and so forth. So even though I don't always get the chance to work out, I still, because of my diet, maintain that physique. And so it's quite hard to argue when I'm hands down the person who's in the best shape in the entire hospital, and no one denies that or can even claim otherwise, even though I work out less than all of them. And that's the part that really blows their mind. They're just like, oh yeah, you work out twice a day. It's like, I haven't been in the gym in 3 months. Oh, okay, yeah, sure, yeah. Work out a lot, and like literally never. And so it's I've been questioned on this and challenged on this so many times, especially a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when just really no one was talking about this. Dr. Baker was sort of the first that started coming out and really sort of mainstream. There were definitely people around, especially in the ketogenic sort of communities, talking about this and the benefits of it. But it was very early on. And so when I was talking to people about that, they really hadn't even heard of it, and they were just blown away. And so I had to explain this a lot to people. I had to defend my ideas to a lot of people. I had a lot of people that were challenging me, because they were plant-based and so forth. And that was, friends of mine who were dietitians, friends of mine who were getting their PhD in nutrition and so forth. And we're all plant-based. And so we just discussed it and challenged and went toe for toe, study for study, argument for argument, and so forth. And I ended up bringing all these people around. One of my friends that was finishing her PhD in nutrition, when I finally got her to the point where she just like had this sort of stunned look, and everything's just sort of sinking in, and she just said, my entire education was a lie. And and she's like, and it was a lie. It had to have been. Like, you've shown me that, you've shown me the evidence, you've shown me the studies, and they're right. now I'm pretty well versed in my arguments, so I can generally defend my position quite well. And so if somebody's willing to take the time and listen and discuss and ask real questions and not just say, oh, you're wrong because of, I feel better on a vegan diet, then there's usually good engagement on that. Now, that said, I am in a hospital and this is in the public system and so forth. So I'm not at the liberty of saying all my views to my patients at all times. That I would like in my private practice when I see patients for functional medicine and preventative medicine consults and so forth. So I do when someone asks me like, well, what else can I do? Is there anything else I can do to help with my condition? I'm in neurosurgery, so these people are very, very unwell. A lot of these people are getting brain tumors and so forth. And like, is there anything I can do? And I don't feel that it's ethical to just mum up when I actually know for cold frozen fact there's quite a lot that they can do to help themselves. Even if it doesn't reverse their cancer, it will improve their health and will improve their body's ability to maintain their health and maintain their fight against the cancer with traditional methods as well. And so I don't feel that it's ethical for me not to say something. And so I do, but I'm careful about it. And I just say, look, this is my opinion. This is not the department. This is not the hospital, certainly. And whatever I tell you, I'm going to give you resources. I'm going to give you studies and you look it up and you decide for yourself. I'm not telling you what to do. And that's been okay so far. There was one time, when I was first here, and I just got asked by a patient who had Crohn's disease, and they were talking about the general surgeons were asked to talk to her about she was under gastroenterology and they wanted her to get surgery, and they were like, well, medical treatments have failed and she's in a lot of pain, she's having these problems, and we think she needs surgery. And I remember she asked me, is there anything else I can do? Because I really don't want surgery, and I was like, well, yeah, actually, and I told her about the elemental diet, and I told her about, and there's studies with the fasting mimicking diet, which is fasting mimicking, just basically putting you on a ketogenic diet. Not even basically, it is putting you on a ketogenic diet, and this has better efficacy than steroids, than these medications, which are very expensive and very hard on your system, as you well know. These, God, methotrexate is just a nasty bastard. Like guys talking about like, oh, you're going to get, cancer and so forth if you don't take methotrexate. It's like, dude, you're going to get cancer if you do take methotrexate. And so these are very harsh medications and very expensive. And so it's just like, look, here are these studies. Like, you don't have to take my word for it. Don't take my word for it. Here are these studies. Here are these resources. You take a look and you decide for yourself. And if you want to try these sorts of things out and that helps you, then that's great. Surgery is always an option. You're not going to lose your spot. You're not going to, you'd be like, no, you had your chance. Some little bastard overheard me and like reported me to, the head of gastroenterology, and this little smarmy bastard, ratted on me. I don't even know what they told them, but told them enough to get her consultant all pissed off at me. And basically he was talking to, my boss and saying, well, we're just going to report this guy to the medical board. And they were just like, whoa, why don't we just, talk to him first, and just say like, hey, we'd prefer it if you didn't say that to our patients, which is fine. It's your patient. But like, I'm not going to lie to someone's face and say, no, there's absolutely nothing else you can do. I'm going to say, here's the research. You do it. And so, it was, I got into a bit of a pissy mood as well. And so this is why I actually looked up tons of these studies. I knew about some of them, and obviously knew about Salsbury and so forth. And, but I just really started digging into this. And because I was like, if this guy reports me, I'm going to report his ass, because this guy's a consultant and he doesn't even know all these studies. They're in his damn field. This isn't even my field. I have nothing to do with this. This and this asshole knows less than me. And he's also putting more pressure on the public system, trying to get the public system to, do a $40,000 surgery that doesn't need to happen. and you don't, all these medications, all these surgeries, all these sorts of things. Like, so this guy is, has a fiducial responsibility, and he's not meeting that. He is, wasting, taxpayer dollars, and he's harming patients. This is malpractice. This is malfeasance. And I had this whole argument. I was just going to absolutely go for this guy's throat if he tried anything. But he didn't in the end. But that's sometimes how I have to live my life. It's like, I have to know my shit, because this isn't the mainstream. This isn't the accepted dogma or narrative. So I need to be on my toes. And I think it's fair too, because when you're challenging the mainstream narrative, the burden of proof is on you. And so I understand that the burden of proof is on me, and I'm happy to meet it. And but if you try to sort of go after me, I'm going to defend myself as well. So I've had to do that. I've had to know how to do that, and I've had to be very well versed in the literature in order to be able to protect myself as well. But most of the time, it's very amicable. Most of the time, people are actually quite interested, because I am in good shape, and I look like I'm in good shape, and so I'm doing this, and people get interested. And in fact, when I'm around people a lot, they always end up at least eating more meat and starting eating the fat on the meat. And a lot of them have actually gone full carnivore, like my friend, the former vegan. But actually, several people in my department went carnivore as well. Not everyone stayed on it, but they've all started eating a lot more meat as well. So mostly, it's very favorable. But you do sort of get some people going like, oh, what is this about? And so you have to be able to back it up, which I'm happy to do.
So do you think people look at Gregor and say, I really would love to look like that, and they get that confidence from him?
My God, if only, if only you could. And
it's funny, isn't it? I thought when you first put up that pic of you next to him, I thought that's a bit unfair, because Anthony obviously in his early 30s. Well, it wasn't unfair anyway, put anyone up against Gregor. And then I saw you 42 or something, and I thought that's pretty good, man. Yeah, he's just got that really thin skin and his inability to string a sentence together, and he's slurring his words an awful lot. And the physique. I remember there was a picture of him sitting there next to a 9-year-old girl, and her arms were bigger than his.
I saw that.
But
that was great.
It's like, how's this guy? I understand that he's alleged to be financed by some Saudi billionaire and all of that, but I'm amazed that people are still listening to him. People you say, well, just look at Gregor, and there's all these. I do love the Gregor memes. They're marvelous, and you bung them up to a vegan, and they just say, oh well, it's not fair because he doesn't train. There you go. Oh, come on, well,
but he does though. Like on all of his videos, he's on like a treadmill, like a walking treadmill. Like
exactly.
He has this air of conceit that is that I think is the most obnoxious part of it. He's like, well, yes, we do that. And I was just like, don't talk like that. Like it's just so disingenuous. And they say, and they say
you'll never debate anyone.
No,
will he?
No, God, no, absolutely not. And and people I got as much, positive feedback as negative feedback for that post, because there were a lot of people who loved it. They're like, yes, screw that guy. And other people are like, wow, that's not fair. This and the other. I'm like, well, I don't know. I think it actually kind of is fair, because he was 43 in that picture. I was 42 in that picture. He works out legitimately more than me. Now, I was fair. I was like, well, and to be fair, I have a long history in being able to work out to a high level. And when I work out, I'm definitely working out a hell of a lot harder and better than he is. That's a given. And so I'm going to get more out of it than he is. But, it was just really, he looks malnourished and sick and 20 years older than I did at the same age. And I'm not trying to be mean to the guy, but he is a public figure who espouses a vegan diet and tries to promote it by, showcasing his own good health that he thinks that he's in. And so he's saying, look how healthy I am. I'm so great. And here are all the positive things about, my health and well-being. And so, well, if you're going to do that, you're opening yourself up for comparison. You just are. And, then you have, me, who's a long-term carnivore, long-term meat eater, and I don't have those aging problems. My girlfriend actually said, she was looking at my hands. She's like, you have the hands of like a 20-year-old, just like the skin and so forth, because that's the thing that, that's one of the signs. That's a very good marker of aging. That's one of the things I've always found is that, you look at someone's hands, that's one of the first signs to go. And that starts aging, even if their face and so forth is still pretty well kept together, their hands seem to tell age quickly. And you do notice that people that are on a carnivore diet, they age much more slowly, or even like reverse aging. My parents just aged backwards when they went on this 4 years ago, and they look great and they're doing great. And people who go vegan aren't necessarily.
Yeah.
And you have you have exceptions.
Yeah, I was definitely older 10 years ago. In all
yeah.
And
yeah.
When I think you're absolutely right. We have to take the mickey out of these vegan docs. There's no need to be aggressive. They get very aggressive towards us. The vegans. I get death threats on my YouTube channel, all sorts. But
nice.
I think you should have your kids taken away for abuse, and all of that. And so I put this video up with these two, a couple of years ago, and they were just sitting there eating meat and talking about being carnivore. And I called it vegan. Carnivore kids dying of malnutrition. And the vegans loved that. They started sharing it. They were tweeting it all over the place. And then they realized what it was about. And you can see these tweets coming down and these shares. As they realized it wasn't to do with that at all. But
that's great. Yeah. and they just shared it without even looking at the data.
Yeah. They thought that was marvelous, But I think it's real fair game to go for these people. I don't think it's fair game to go for the people who've been fooled into it.
No,
because these people need some serious help, and they need some. Some of the people who threatened me have come to me a couple of years later when they go, right, my thyroid's blown up, my knees don't work, my arse has exploded. Something's happened. Yeah, and they say you were right, and then we become friends. So I, whatever aggression I get, I don't give it back. Peter, come here.
Wait.
Come here.
Wait.
All right, I'll make an appointment. But, so I think it's important to show up these docs because I love these memes where you've got the carnivore docs on one side and you got the vegan docs on the other, and it's just so obvious, isn't it? And then of course they will always put up, oh, but look at this vegan bodybuilder, and you go, no. He built that on meat, and then he went vegan for a year, and then his performance tanked, and he didn't tell you when he stopped being vegan.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, this little chap, right, Peter, if nobody's met him, who's not familiar with my channel, but he's sort of a mini you with his top off, and he's just like, the muscle he's got, and he's so solid and heavy. He's got no fat on him. But you pick one of his friends up who's sort of fatter, and they're really light. They're all full of Cocoa Pops and pizza. And he must have the most amazing bone density and muscle because he weighs a ton, and yet he's got Actually, you eat a bit of chocolate and you always whinge for that. But basically, when he eats a meal, it's meat and that's it.
Nice. Yeah.
And listen, I want to call you up about this, Peter, because when you've come on before and I've said, see, he's never eaten any vegetables. You go, yes, I have. He's never had any broccoli. Where have you had broccoli? Now I'm putting you on the spot.
Like 3 years ago.
Where did you have it? Because I never fed it to you.
At home in this house.
Well, who fed that to you? You wouldn't even recognize it as a food item. You wouldn't eat it. Did you actually eat it?
Yeah.
Did you? What did you think? Do you really crave it now? Do you think I want broccoli every day?
No.
There we go. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, cool. So talk about kids for a sec. We've been on for just over an hour and a half now. I have to wind it up soon, I guess. I'll be respectful of your time. But, a lot of people say, oh, but what do you feed your kids? Are they human beings or what do you think?
Yeah. Well, it's always the same. Well, is this like, it's good for guys, but I don't want to, what about women? Is this good for women too? It's just like, yes, why wouldn't it be? And they think, well, I don't want to get all big and muscular like you. Like, well, you're not, because you're not me. And so you're you. And so your body will optimize for you. And so, if you eat meat and you eat in the way that your species evolved to eat and that you're biologically designed to eat, you'll be the healthiest version of yourself that you can be genetically. And if you eat anything else, it will detract from that. Even if you're eating, low-fat chicken breast, that's less nutritious than a fatty steak. It just is. And so you're going to lose out on that. And then if you go to something that's a negative, like broccoli, you're really losing out. So, I've so many people just so wrapped up in all of the old, sayings and so forth that, like everyone is different. Everyone has a different diet. Everything's different for different people. Well, there's some people that are more resistant to species inappropriate food, but no one has a different optimal diet. And I get people, know-it-alls and things like that. Who's just like, oh, well, yeah, sure, blah, blah, blah. And I just ask them very, very simple question. Okay, well, then you provide me an example of one example of two members of the same species who have a different optimal diet. Just one in the entire animal kingdom, just one. No one can do it because it doesn't exist. And so, when they say, well, what about, kids and so forth? Okay, what do baby lions eat? Milk. Okay, what do they eat after that? Same thing that adult lions eat. Fine. What about for females? What does a female lion eat? Same thing that a male lion eats. What about a female cow, female giraffe, female gorilla, female dolphin? You're the same species. You're going to eat different amounts. It's going to do slightly different things to your body based on your genetics and your hormonal system, based on on what you are. But that's still the optimal diet. That's still optimal for you. It's the most important for kids because you only get one chance to develop. And then that's it. You grow into what you can, and then it solidifies, and you try to maintain and be as healthy as you can in that vessel. But you're not going to grow anymore. Your brain's not going to grow anymore. It can develop, and it can become sharper and so forth, and you can become more athletic or more pain and so forth. You can change a lot once you in your adult form. However, you're never going to grow more. You're never going to develop more. You're never going to get longer bones, bigger brain, bigger jaw. You either have eaten the requisite nutrients to grow a jaw that can fit your wisdom teeth, or you haven't. And that's it. And once your wisdom teeth are out, they're out. They're not going to, you go back and you start eating enough, vitamin K2 and so forth. It's too late. Your jaw is what it is. And so for kids, it's the most important for them to get just fatty meat and nothing else. Now, maybe your kids can be really healthy. I mean, we all grew up in the time of omnivory, where we were eating meat and plants and all this sort of crap and being told that vegetables were good for us and fighting that with all we had. At least I did. But we grew up fine, but we did not develop to our genetic potential. None of us did, because our mothers weren't carnivore when they were gestating, and they weren't carnivore when they were breastfeeding, and we weren't pure carnivores when we were growing up. And so we did not develop to our genetic potential. You look at the average population size of the average height of the adult male in populations all around the world, that denotes the average health of that civilization. And so you look back at these prehistoric Homo sapiens and so forth, the areas that had, through the fossil record was clear that they had a lot of access to a bunch of mammoths and so forth. And they just had an abundance of energy at all times available to them. They were on average 6'4" on average. I'm 6'3", so I'm below average for an actual human. So, for my genetics, and, maybe I would be taller because my father is very tall. His father and their brothers were all like 6'9", 6'10", just monsters. 100 years ago, these people were born. And, and they were way the hell taller than anybody else around. And so, if I had actually developed my genetic potential, I'd be a freaking monster. And I'm pissed. I'm pissed that I'm not. I should be another 6 inches taller and another, 50 pounds heavier of muscle. I'd just be a beast. What's that? Sorry?
You greedy bugger.
I know. Yeah. But I want it, It's like, I feel it's mine. It's mine by rights, It's I should have had that. And, so that's the thing. That's the difference, just a N equals one sort of sample. Like, my younger brother was a very picky eater, and he just wanted to eat white rice with tempura sauce. And he just like, and I remember talking to my mom, I was like, Mom, you need to get him to eat good things. Well, I can't, he has to eat something. I have to get him to eat something. He won't eat anything else except this. I'm like, no, he doesn't have to just eat anything. If he's going to eat crap, that's not good for him. He needs to eat good food. But he's not going to eat. Well, then don't feed him, like he'll come around. Like he doesn't want to just die, like he gets hungry, he'll eat, the proper food. But, she gave into his, terrorist tactics. And so he just ate that.
It is difficult. It is difficult when kids, because my daughter's 13. She's at that sort of age where she can go get stuff on her own, and this stuff is so hyper palatable and so addictive. She knows everything about how, the mixture of carbs and fats never happens in nature, and that stuff you just can't stop eating and all that. So, but it's still addictive. And at that age, you're immortal, aren't you? But it is interesting to see that, she's put on a bit of fat since she started eating that, in the last couple of years. And she's aware of that. She's cool. If I cook for her, it's always meat. I won't do anything else. But she gets her own stuff. But what is interesting is between the two of them, like my missus was pregnant with her when she was vegetarian. And then when she saw me heal after that, she got out of that and went carnivore when she was pregnant with Peter, who you just met.
Nice.
And his jaw is definitely wider than hers. You can see the differences in the facial structure,
Yeah.
So that's like an N equals 1 in the family. All, of course, just useless anecdotes.
Yeah. Of course, it's your actual life and your child. It's not all that useless.
Yeah. So one thing before we wrap up, what do you think about? We're finding an awful lot of stuff. The other sort of disconnects, the other sort of ancestral disconnects, and we're finding huge results with people when they put everything together. They get the light right, they get some grounding together, they get some sun, they get rid of the Wi-Fi at night, things like that. Just all the sort of ancestral disconnects. I think most of the sort of misconceptions are around diet. And so my friend, Dr. Jack Cruz, he's always saying to me, will you stop being a diet guru and start being a light guru? Start talking about light. And I go, yeah, fine. And we do. But there's most of the misconceptions around that. I mean, some vegan comes to you and you say, hey, listen, if you turn your Wi-Fi off at night, you might get rid of some of that effects. Maybe don't watch the TV too late without some blue blockers. Get up in the morning, get some sun in your eyes. That's fantastic. And eat some steak. Fuck off.
Yeah.
They won't listen, right? So that's why I talk about that. But how important do you think it is to be looking at all these other things, and do you address it? The thing is, it's often so tempting when someone goes on a carnivore diet, they get such great results. But then if you add the other stuff, it seems to kind of put the edge on it too.
Well, I think you're right. The closer that we get to our our genetic heritage, the better we're going to be. And we were designed to live in a certain environment. And when we go outside of that environment, we're going to run into some trouble. We're basically the same genetically as we have been for 300,000 years. And yet we live on a different planet, basically. And we were not designed for these sorts of things. And so you're going to get a lot of turmoil. It's not something that I've looked into as much and really dug into. But I certainly recognize it as just as important, because this is part and parcel of our native environment. Obviously, food is a big part of that, because that's literally what we're made of, and we're recreating ourselves on a daily basis with that. But everything else is absolutely an integral part of that. I certainly notice, when I go out camping, I get away from all technology and so forth, and I just naturally, like when it gets dark, I'm going to sleep, and I wake up as soon as it's light, and I just feel so much better for that. And I know so many people, the more they get out in nature, the more they want to be out in nature. And so, they get out and they experience that, and they start living the way that we were biologically programmed to live. And they're like, this feels right. This is really good. And they get so many unexplainable benefits to their health and their mental state, especially even when they're not doing carnivore. This is something that's, very common in society at large, is, getting back in touch with nature and so forth. It's really, healing in a lot of ways. And I think that now that people are more sensitive to the fact that our environment makes such a big difference, the food that we eat and so forth. And we've just been sort of fed a bunch of crap for so long. People, I think, are starting to pay attention to that and say, like, okay, how can we again, like you say, fine tune these things to get even better? I think that's absolutely the way to go. I think that's something that I need to pay a little more attention to. But I do the same things. Like I try to avoid screens. I try to avoid lights towards the end of the day. I try to get up, in the morning with the sun. My schedule is a bit screwed. So, I'm doing like 130, 135 hours a week sometimes when I'm on call, and it's very busy. So, I could just be working, 36 hours straight, sometimes, 60 hours straight with maybe an hour of sleep, catching an hour of sleep, a night for 64 hours and just absolutely blown. It's hard to keep a natural rhythm like that.
It just shows the benefits of the carnivore diet to make you that resilient, still in such good shape, while you're doing that. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't really be able to do this as well as I am, if it wasn't for that. A lot of my colleagues, it's hard on it. It's definitely hard on me. It's very difficult when you get those crazy calls. On calls, not always like that, but you hit runs where you're just working the whole weekend and then you're working the Monday because you can't go home post call, and it's a rough weekend, and you're just go the entire weekend. Maybe get an hour sleep Saturday night, maybe get 2 on Sunday. And then, you're working for 14 hours on your normal day, and then you have to go to work in the morning, so it's like, it's and it can be very draining. And even if you're getting 8 hours of sleep after that, you still feel like crap because your body needs about 16 to recover from all that. If I wasn't eating like this, that would not be very, possible. And
no, I don't envy you that. I mean, I have to have a kip in the afternoon, a little nap when I have a late gig, just to make sure the body clock is resetting, But Anthony, listen, thank you so much, man. I'm gonna wrap it up now, just because I could go on forever, but I'll keep it under 2 hours. Then if I do get it on YouTube, then it can go over to my other channels as well. And I'd love to get you back, but I'll also really love to get you, if you'd be willing to come on to one of our red pill discussions and have a chat with the guys about the ins and outs of the medical corruption, because this is the corruption in medicine and in diet is amazing, and we can keep you in the past about it so that you don't get in trouble with your colleagues. But man, you've been amazing. Thank you so much. And please listen, tell everybody where they can get in touch with you and see your stuff, because please go and have a look at Anthony's stuff. It's brilliant. He's got great little shorts on YouTube and stuff that you can just send to people when they don't have much attention span. And go and check him out. He's fantastic. Great info, well presented. So let everybody know where you can be found.
Well, thank you very much, first of all. So I have a YouTube channel that's just called Anthony Chaffee MD. So Chaffee spelled CHAFFE. That's also the name of my Instagram account. So just Anthony Chaffee MD. And I do a lot of posts there. I'll obviously post when I'm putting something up on my YouTube channel or my podcast. But I also do a lot of posts where I just do a short sort of dialogue, almost like a little blog post on just different sorts of things that I think that are, people can find helpful, and little things on cholesterol, things on, fat and fat adaptation and different sorts of things that people ask me about. And I actually find that people ask me about different questions, and I give them a long answer, and I go like, well, actually that'd be something useful for everyone to go, and I post that. And so there's a lot of different things that people can find there, and different resources that hopefully people find helpful, and they seem to have so far. And then I have a podcast that I just sort of started a couple months ago called The Plant Free MD, and that's on Spotify. It's going to be on Google and Apple. I'm just waiting for approval to come through, but so I have that podcast and the YouTube channel, and I post most of my stuff there, and then everything's sort of coordinated through Instagram.
Excellent. And if you ever fancy a chat on that about the sort of ins and outs of what it's like to go through autoimmunity, keep me in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. No, it would be great to have you on. No, that would be absolutely awesome.
I'd love to. Yeah. Anyway, Thank you so much. So thanks everybody for getting this far. I'm sure it wasn't difficult to get this far with the amazing stuff that Anthony's come out with. And see you next time. So see you soon, Anthony.
Have a good one.
Music with the people.